Hi guys, so what I'd like to do is to just point you to a few revision resources, and I'd also like to do a little walkthrough of a previous exam paper just to give you an idea of some good exemplar work and good practice and what examiners are looking for and so on and so forth in the exam papers. So what we're looking at the moment is the Tutor to You website. If you haven't heard of it, as a student of economics, you really ought to have heard of it by now. They have been putting on for the last week or two a number of webinars, and the topics, some of the topics are shown on the screen in front of you. These are absolutely free and they cover the various topics listed there. Whenever you select one of the topics, so let me just choose price elasticity of supply. Those of you who've watched my video on AS Micro, you'll know that this is certainly an area of the syllabus, the specification, which is quite likely to be assessed this year, so certainly one worth looking at. Whenever you select these, you'll find that you're taken to the next page, which has a link to the slides, downloadable slides, and also a video clip which you can play, pause, make notes on, etc., etc. Now they're broken down into AS and A2, but actually, having watched a number of these myself, I think that really if you're a student of AS, the A2 ones are worth watching, and if you're a student of A2, the AS ones are worth watching. So really, it's a great resource for you all to be using. So check that one out on Tutor to You. So that's Tutor, Tutor, the number 2 and the letter U. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to look at then, we'll just have a quick walk through this exam paper. This is from 2011, and it's one of my former students who was an outstanding candidate, and this is the way that the paper comes back to you if you request the exam back from the board. And generally speaking, the number of ticks represent the number of marks that have been awarded for the particular question. So the first question here is, what is meant by the term international trade? You will get on your paper lots of definitions, and there is nothing difficult about answering questions like this. At least there's nothing difficult about it if you have done the necessary revision, and that revision is sit down and just learn word for word, parrot fashion, learn the definitions, so that when you're asked a particular definition, you can just very swiftly, very competently note the definition on the paper. Next question is, using the information in the case study, identify 2 methods of trade restriction. So we've got the 2 methods there. Be careful that embargo is not a method of trade restriction, because it's a complete ban. I remember marking that paper myself. Lots of people wrote embargo and they didn't get one of the marks for it. And the other important thing on that question is, when it says using information in the case study, don't use your own knowledge and by accident pick out something which isn't mentioned in the case study. Right, another very straightforward question, 3-mark question, 3 ticks, full marks. Define. So again, we've talked about define questions. Okay, now we're into 2B. This one says, describe 2 economic costs of rapid economic growth. Now it's a 6-mark question, so the breakdown on that is 1 plus 2. 1 for the identification, 2 for the explanation. And then 1 plus 2, 1 for the identification, 2 for the explanation. Now this candidate, my former student here, who went on to study at Oxford, I believe, has made a fatal error here, and that fatal error is that he has written beneath the area of the exam script. So I mean beneath the dashed lines. When the examiners get these papers, they're often scanned, they're not often scanned in, they're always scanned in. And so it's good practice, indeed best practice, if you run out of space, do not write, and I'll just show you here, do not write down here at the bottom of the page, because the examiner may not actually see that, because it may not be part of the scanned frame. So best practice is to put a note at the bottom of the page, at the bottom of the last dash line, saying please see page 15 or whatever, and do your answer there. Don't write in the columns, in the margins, up the side of the page. Keep within the boundaries of the actual writing frame on the paper. Next question, again 2 marks, 2 ticks, using information from the case study we've discussed previously. Next question, explain the likely relationship between changes in consumer expenditure and investment. It's quite a straightforward question, that one. It's always advisable in these types of questions where you're asked about an element of aggregate demand, C plus I plus G plus X minus M, it's always good practice in those questions to start your answer by simply defining the equation, the AD equation. Very often you get marks for that. And again, this candidate has got, well, they got 3 out of the possible 4 on that one. Okay, describe what happened between 2008 and 2009 to the price level in Argentina. Describe questions need practice. They're very often badly done. And the key way to answer them is to look really for 3 things. You want to identify trends. So look at the start point in the time period that you're shown, look at the end point, and just describe the trend, and then pick out any anomalies in the data, any outline information, and then it's always good practice to include the word higher or lower, or highest and lowest in your answer. And if you do that, generally speaking, you'll get the 3 marks. So we've got a couple of described questions here, all answered very well by this particular candidate. And that's another straightforward explain question. Okay, and another explain question, same type of thing. Now we're into this question. This is the first one in this paper. Comment on whether a cut in tax rates will always result in a budget deficit. Okay. Comment questions, I hope by this stage of proceedings you should know this. If you don't already, the way to answer a comment question is you explain what theory suggests ought to happen, but then you outline reasons why that particular theory might not actually come true in practice. So in this instance, comment on whether a cut in tax rates will result in a budget deficit. You would go about this question by saying, okay, well, here, Mr. Examiner, or Mrs. Examiner, here is the reason why the cut in the tax rate will result in a budget deficit. Obviously, budget deficit, government spending being greater than taxation, and you're saying that you're reducing the rate of tax, therefore G becomes greater than T. But then you would go on to comment and say, however, here's a couple of reasons why it might not. So there's the however section on this candidate's. So what's he or she said? However, the government may have been running a large budget surplus, in which case a cut in tax would not be enough to push the budget into a deficit but only reduce the surplus. Great evaluative comment. In addition, the government may also choose to lower spending, cancelling out or even outweighing the loss in tax revenue. so the budget doesn't fall into deficit. Again, another great evaluative comment. Finally, a cut in tax rates may not result in a reduction of tax revenue. Firms and households may get more income, in which case a cut in tax would not necessarily mean a cut in revenue, so revenue will not be lost. Great answers, 3 tremendous evaluative comments. I would try, generally speaking, on a comment question to give at least 2 good evaluative statements. You can see again another element of bad practice here, writing beneath the writing frame. Here we've got another comment question answered and approached in a slightly different way, and that is to draw a diagram first. Now there's no room on this question for a diagram, in that there's no blank space for it, as they often do when the exam board expect a diagram. But it's often simply to get things clear in your own mind and to explain them clearly. It's often very good practice to draw a diagram, so I'm a big fan actually of getting my students to draw a diagram. And then, same procedure as before, explain the theory and then outline the reasons why what theory says might not actually come true in practice. And then we move to the discussion question. Discuss the effectiveness of lowering the rate of interest in order to stimulate economic growth. Lovely exam question, if only they were always as straightforward as that. It's unlikely that this year's will be, by the way. Now, the exam question's worth 18 marks. You get an hour and a half for the paper, and so you really should be spending 27 minutes on the essay, so basically half an hour on this essay answer.
Mrs. Young, please contact reception. Thank you.
I always say to my students, it's good practice to do a plan, and you can see that this candidate has written quite a detailed plan, and the examiner has seen it. You can see on the right hand side there's an annotation there to say it's been seen. If the essay was an absolute disaster, the examiner could come back to this and look for 1 or 2 places where marks could be awarded. So it's always worth doing. Especially, you know, some people get budget deficit and trade deficit mixed up, and if the essay is about a budget deficit G&T and they then write about X and M, exports and imports, well, they might have something in a plan which might glean them some marks. So it's always good practice to do a plan. And then it's always good practice really to build through the levels. Level 1, your basic knowledge. Level 2, your basic application. Level 3, which is where you're getting into the higher marks really, the analysis. And then level 4, which is your evaluation. So you can see this candidate has done that quite well really. Levels 2s and 3s here. Level 3 is a diagram. Really, as soon as you start drawing a diagram and analysing it, you're getting into sort of 9-10 marks out of 18. Then we hit the level 4, which is the comments, the evaluative statements, the reasons why what the question has asked for might actually not happen in practice. And so this candidate's got 1L4, 2L4, 3L4, 4L4, 5L4, 5L4 and a nice conclusion. And this candidate got 18 marks out of 18 on that. The examiners are not told, do not award full marks for an exam, for an essay question rather. So if it's good enough, it will get the marks, it will get the 18 out of 18. So that's a few thoughts on general sort of walkthrough on the exam, and I will be back again next week with a few updates.